In October of 2019, I traveled from New Jersey to Los Angeles to compete in a table tennis tournament. I often traveled around the country for these events, usually staying with teams also competing to save money. However, this time I had to stay alone. I hastily booked an Airbnb near the Vegas Strip without realizing that the neighborhood wasn't the best. I thought about canceling and finding another place, but I convinced myself that it was convenient and I wouldn't be spending much time there anyway. When I arrived, I didn't see the host, and I wouldn't have known who to look for since the profile picture on Airbnb was just a flower. The host had given me the key code to the room, which was a small studio apartment sharing a wall with the host's house. There was only one door in and out of the studio. The first red flag was that the key code for the lock on the door was simply 1234567. I found that odd, but considering the Wi-Fi password was password, I figured the host was just an older person who wasn't tech savvy. The reviews for the room were pretty good, so I decided to stay. Around 9:30 p.m., things got creepy. I was close to falling asleep when I heard tapping on the window in front of my bed. The window had drapes covering it, so I couldn't see who was making the noise. I responded by saying, "Huh," loud enough for whoever it was to hear me. A minute or two passed in silence before the tapping started again. I said hello pretty loudly and it went away. I was on edge and immediately messaged the host asking if it was them tapping on the window. An hour later, the host finally responded saying, "I was going to bring you some water, but it seemed like you were asleep, so I left." I was still very much on edge and knew I wasn't going to be able to sleep. I thought about going for a walk to the store or taking a shower to clear my mind, but something told me to sit tight and wait to see what happened. About 45 minutes went by. It was around midnight by this point when I heard some noise outside. I then heard the distinct sound of someone trying the key code on my door. The first attempt failed, but I could hear them trying again. This time I heard the sound of the lock disengaging. The door was unlocked. I threw the blankets off of me and ran to the door as it was opening. I slammed it shut in the person's face, yelling, "This is my room. Get out of here. Leave." They responded in a deep voice from the other side of the door saying, "Maddle said this is my room." Maddle was the name of the host. I kept repeating what I had said before and called the cops, speaking loudly enough so they knew I was on the phone with the police. The police eventually arrived and were not surprised by my story. They said they would hang around until I called an Uber to leave. The host was very combative and unapologetic, and their alibi for who that person was changed multiple times. When the Uber arrived, I jumped in and felt relieved to be getting out of there. It still creeps me out that I never saw the person who was opening my door. I have a feeling it was some kind of setup. If the host knew I was flying in from the East Coast, the 9:30 p.m. tapping on the window would have been equivalent to 12:30 a.m. my time, and the invasion would be around 3 a.m. Maybe it would have just been a robbery, but it could have been much worse. Since then, I have never used Airbnb again. This experience was enough to put me off from ever using it again, preferring the security and professionalism of hotels. I still travel for tournaments, but I make sure my accommodations are safe and well reviewed. I once booked an Airbnb by myself in Arizona because I had a job interview there. Since it was so far from home, I decided to make a short trip out of it. I chose this particular Airbnb because it was much cheaper than any hotel I could find. It was about half an hour away from the interview location, which was fine with me. The place was off a dead-end secluded road and had a nice view of the desert in the backyard. I brought my laptop with me to get work done for my current job during the day, which kept me busy most of the time. I planned to stay for 3 days. My interview was on the second day, which was a Tuesday, and I would be leaving on Friday. On Monday night, the night before my interview, I was practicing interview questions and getting some last-minute knowledge about the company. I was doing this on my laptop in the living room around 9 p.m. when I heard a tap at the window. It wasn't exactly a knock. It sounded more like someone tapping a finger on the glass. My head swung to the left to look at the window in reaction. I didn't see anyone, but it was pitch black outside. I was kind of scared to look out the window, but I had to be brave and just do it. There was no one there as far as I could see, just darkness. Maybe it was a bug hitting the window. After all, Arizona has some pretty nasty bugs. The next day, I got through my interview and thought I did pretty well. For the rest of my trip, I explored different parts of the town in my car, ate at different restaurants, and relaxed in the backyard in the sun. Little did I know, someone was likely watching me while I was in the backyard. At night, I was inside watching Breaking Bad on Netflix when it happened again, a single tap at the window. This time it was obvious it wasn't a bug. I was even more disturbed, but once again rushed to the window. Even though I saw no one, it didn't mean someone wasn't out there. I checked the windows by the front door, then opened the door and looked outside for a second. Seeing no one, I went back inside and then to the back door. I stepped outside onto the back porch and looked out to the desert behind the house, silence and darkness. Then I heard a click, a sound like someone clicking their tongue at the roof of their mouth. It was off in the distance beyond the light from the house, somewhere in the cold desert. I felt as though someone could be hiding behind any number of bushes, watching me and toying with me. I yelled out, and almost in response there was another click. I pinpointed the direction it came from and looked that way. I could see someone now, standing not too far away, dressed in dark clothes blending into the darkness of the desert. I started walking closer, but then stopped, realizing I didn't want to get any closer to that person. I called out, "You're on private property. I'm going to call the cops if you don't leave." The person quickly walked away. I theorized it might be the Airbnb owner, but that seemed far-fetched. I didn't know what to think. The next night, I was in bed on my laptop watching Breaking Bad again before going to sleep. I think I watched 2 episodes, so I was doing this for about an hour and a half. I didn't hear any noises in the house, though I was definitely thinking about the encounter from earlier. When I finally turned off the light and tried to fall asleep, within 10 seconds, there was a click sound again, muffled, coming from inside the closet. I looked at the closet door, which was open just a crack. My natural response was to spring off the bed, still in my pajamas, and run to the car. I sat in the driveway with the car running and called 911. I stared at the house as I spoke to the dispatcher, waiting to see if someone would come out. All my stuff was still in there. A police car arrived, and together we did a quick investigation of the house. It was very small, with not many places to hide. There were no signs of forced entry. Conclusively, I packed my stuff and left that night for a nearby hotel. I contacted both Airbnb and the host, and was only able to get a partial refund for my stay. I still think it might have been the host of the Airbnb. Who else would have access to the house? There were no signs of forced entry, which leads me to believe whoever it was might have had a key. But maybe I'm wrong. Maybe it was a stranger who snuck in at an opportune time. 20 years ago, I worked at a gas station for about a year. It wasn't a job I enjoyed much, mainly because I often worked the overnight shift. The small convenience store attached to the gas station was open 24/7, and during my shifts, I was usually alone. We didn't get many customers at night, so there wasn't a need for more staff. The gas station was in a slightly rural area. Some cars would come in for gas, but not many people came inside the store. This made the job easy most of the time, but it could also be lonely and a bit creepy. Being alone in the middle of the night sometimes brought in sketchy characters, but I managed to do my job. That is until one night, an experience pushed me to my breaking point and made me quit. It happened on a Friday night during my overnight shift. It was around 11 p.m., and I hadn't had any customers in the store for a while. From behind the counter, I could see out to the 4 gas pumps. They were all empty, and even the road next to the gas station was quiet. Then I saw headlights in the distance. Soon, a larger white SUV, which I later identified as a 1996 Chevy Suburban, pulled into the gas station. It drove around slowly and then parked at one of the pumps. The way it was parked, it was facing directly away from me, so I could only see the back window. I didn't think much of it, assuming it was just another customer filling their tank. I sat behind the counter, waiting for the person to either get gas or come inside the store. But after a few minutes, no one had gotten out of the vehicle. This was unusual, as people typically started pumping gas or came inside almost immediately. The person in the SUV just stayed in the car. While I wasn't staring at them the whole time, I could see them clearly through the big window in the gas station. After about 30 minutes still, no one had gotten out of the car. This was really weird. Another car came, got gas, and left during this time, but the SUV remained. I got up to get a drink and returned to my spot behind the counter. When I did, I noticed someone in the back of the SUV. The rear window was tinted, but I could see a face close to the glass, staring at me. It was a man, and he had wide eyes fixed on me. I didn't know if he was the driver, but no one else had gotten out of the vehicle. I looked at him for about a minute, and he stared back the entire time. I was creeped out and tried to distract myself with other things, but I couldn't stop glancing back at the SUV. Every time I did, the man was still there, staring at me. This went on for almost an hour. I couldn't believe it. Eventually, I decided to go outside. Maybe I was just curious, or perhaps I thought I might figure out what was going on. I didn't plan to talk to the person, but I left the counter and walked to the door. The man was still staring at me from the back of the SUV, now about 50 feet away. I took a few steps into the parking lot, and then the man moved. He quickly ducked down and out of sight. I saw some movement inside the SUV, but couldn't tell what it was. Looking back, I think he was crawling over the seats. About 10 seconds later, the SUV suddenly started moving. It reversed quickly, heading straight toward me. I had to move back quickly to avoid getting hit. The SUV continued in reverse, forcing me back up against the building. It screeched to a stop just feet away from me. I thought the driver was going to run me over or back into the building, but he stopped. Then the SUV sped off, tires screeching, and disappeared down the road. I was in shock. The guy had tried to run me over. I went back inside, hoping he wouldn't return. Luckily, he didn't. After that night, I put in my notice to quit. The whole experience was so bizarre and terrifying. I have no idea why the man stared at me for so long and then tried to run me over. That night at the gas station was the final straw for me, and I knew I couldn't keep working there after that. Working late nights at the gas station was always kind of spooky, but nothing could have prepared me for the scary stuff that happened on this night. As I counted the minutes until the end of my shift, I felt uneasy and even more bored than usual. At 23, I thought I had faced my fair share of challenges, but what happened that night was beyond anything I could imagine. Standing behind the counter, absent-mindedly rearranging snacks, I noticed a shadowy figure lingering near the gas pumps. A chill ran down my spine when I recognized the silhouette. It was him, the man who had bothered me on and off for years. My heart quickened, and beads of sweat formed on my forehead as he walked into the store. His presence alone was suffocating, and memories of past botheration flooded my mind. I tried to keep my composure, reminding myself that I was no longer the vulnerable target he once knew. But as he approached with a sinister smile, I realized I was wrong to underestimate the fear he could cause. "What a coincidence seeing you here," he sneered. The fact that I was now single seemed to fuel his predatory intentions. He faked a sense of familiarity, acting as if he was my boyfriend returning from a long absence. Panic set in as he refused to take no for an answer. When I insisted I was uninterested in restarting any kind of connection, the atmosphere grew tense, and I felt the weight of his aggression escalating. The air thickened, and a mix of anxiety and overheating made me feel like I was going to pass out. Desperation must have gripped him, and his attempts to push my phone number turned into a violent struggle. In an instant, he lunged towards me, grabbed me, and dragged me out to his car. He started hitting me and yelling at me to stop screaming, trying to force me into the car. Luckily, I put up a good enough fight. Just as I was about to lose all hope, a guardian angel in the form of a passerby burst out of his car. The stranger, sensing the urgency of the situation, bravely intervened. A huge fight broke out between the two, and I saw the entire thing. The man who rescued me was much bigger and easily de-escalated the situation. With a final loud blow, he sent my botherer running away into the night. I stood there trembling, but also grateful, as the man helped calm me down and called the police. He even stayed to give a statement and his side of the story. The whole thing was caught on camera, and the police were able to see he was only trying to protect me, meaning he did no wrong. Unfortunately, I don't know my botherer's name, and the police couldn't seem to identify the man enough through the lousy cameras. So he's still out there somewhere. I had to quit my job because I was terrified he'd come back. Even now, I have to wonder if he knows where I live. He's never showed up at my house, but I didn't think he knew where I worked either. Last week, I had one of the scariest experiences of my life. It was the middle of summer, and my parents had gone away for the weekend to our house in Cape Cod, which is about a 2-hour drive from where we live. They do this sometimes, leaving me home alone for a few days. Usually it's no big deal. My mom had left some pulled pork and pasta for me to heat up whenever I got hungry, and I had some cash if I wanted to order a pizza. So everything seemed fine. The first night alone, I stayed up until 3 o'clock in the morning playing Xbox, so naturally, I slept in pretty late the next day. I checked my phone when I woke up and saw that it was already past 1 o'clock. I had plans to play street hockey with my friends at 3 o'clock, so I jumped out of bed and stumbled into the shower. Now, I'm the type of person who takes really long showers, especially when I'm home alone. So I was in there for about 45 minutes, just scrolling through Reddit and Twitter on my phone, when I heard one of the doors in the house open. The bathroom is right above the back door, and it makes a loud noise when it opens and closes. I immediately froze because obviously I was supposed to be alone in the house. I waited for a couple of minutes, hoping to hear some other noise that would explain what was going on. Maybe it was just the wind, or maybe my parents had come home early. But when I didn't hear anything else, I figured I should go downstairs and check it out. Even though our house is old and creaky, and every step on the stairs makes a ton of noise, I tried to be as quiet as possible. I took my time going down the stairs, trying not to make too much noise. When I got to the second to last step, right before I could see into the kitchen, I paused for a moment to gather my courage. I knew I was probably being paranoid, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. So I took a deep breath, told myself I was being silly, and stepped around the corner into the kitchen. And that's when I saw him. Standing in the middle of my kitchen, about 2 feet away from me, was a man. He had this massive smile on his face, but that wasn't what freaked me out the most. It was his arms. They were twisted in this weird, almost backwards position, like nothing I had ever seen before. It was like something out of a horror movie. I don't know why, but in that moment, I just reacted. I took a step towards him and punched him in the jaw as hard as I could. I didn't stop to think about what I was doing. I just wanted him out of my house. Then, I bolted up the stairs, leaving my towel behind in the kitchen. I ran into my room and locked the door behind me. Then I put a chair up against it for good measure. I called 911, practically in tears, and told the operator what had happened. I was sitting on the floor, curled up in a ball, staring at the door and praying that the police would get there soon. For what felt like hours, I sat there in silence, listening for any sound from outside my door. Eventually, I heard banging on the front door and the voices of 2 police officers entering the house. I felt a wave of relief wash over me as I opened the door to them. Nowadays, my parents don't leave me home alone anymore. Thank goodness. And I always double-check all the locks in the house before I go to bed. I still get nightmares sometimes, and I can't help but feel on edge whenever I'm alone in the house. But I'm doing okay. The police never found the guy who was in my house, which is terrifying to think about. I have no idea what he wanted or who he was, but I'm just grateful that I'm safe. And even though it's been a week since it happened, I still can't shake the feeling that he might come back. But for now, I'm just trying to move on and put the whole thing behind me. It was a few years back when I lived with my ex-boyfriend. We had been in our new place for about a month when something really freaky went down. That night, my ex was out with his work buddies, leaving me home alone. I spent the early evening chilling out, watching TV, and munching on some takeout. Everything seemed normal until it wasn't. A couple of times I heard these strange noises, but whenever I tried to focus on them, they stopped. It was like they were playing tricks on my mind. As the night wore on, I decided to head upstairs and use my laptop for a bit before hitting the hay. See, we hadn't gotten our phone line installed yet, and my pay-as-you-go phone had run out of credit, so I couldn't reach anyone if I needed help. It was just me, alone in the house for the night. I was sitting in the bedroom, the only light coming from a small table lamp, when I started to hear those weird noises again. It was like a light rattling, so faint that I had to strain to hear it. I turned off my music and tried to figure out where it was coming from. I peeked down to the front door from our bedroom, but there was no one there. Our backyard was surrounded by a high brick wall and a solid wooden gate, and I couldn't see anything out there either. Feeling a bit spooked, I grabbed this heavy iron rod we had found in the back of the wardrobe. I didn't turn on any lights, not wanting to give away my position to any potential intruders. With no way to call for help, I was starting to get really worried that someone might actually be in the house. I headed into the bathroom to see if I could get a better look into the alley behind our house. Our bathroom window overlooked the alley, and as I peered out, I heard whispering. It was coming from directly behind our gate. I couldn't make out whole sentences, but I caught enough to know that whoever these guys were, they had seen us move in and had spotted all our valuable stuff. They knew I was home alone and were waiting for me to go to sleep so they could break in. I stayed perched on that ledge for what felt like forever, until suddenly there was this loud thud. I guess they got tired of being sneaky and started trying to break down the gate. I could see it shaking under their blows, and I felt completely helpless. I'm a tiny girl, only 5 feet 3 inches, and probably weighed around 105 pounds at the time. I clutched that iron rod, trying to think of where I could hide. Then a bright light flooded the alley. At first, I thought they were shining a flashlight at our house, but then I heard barking and shouting. I peeked out again and saw that the house across the alley had a floodlight installed, and it was lighting up the whole area. I heard the guys cursing and then hurrying away down the alley. I stayed locked in that bedroom until my ex stumbled in at around 4 a.m. I didn't sleep a wink that night. The next morning, I went out to the yard and saw that the gate was hanging off one hinge, almost torn off. The keyhole was covered in scratches, like someone had tried to force the lock. If it hadn't been for the people in the house behind us, I dread to think what might have happened. Back when I was 13, my family lived in a house with a balcony that connected my room and my mom's room. The balcony looked out onto the street, and there were 2 trees next to it, one of which I often climbed. One night, when my brother and mom were out, I was in bed reading with a dim light. I heard rustling in one of the trees outside, but I didn't think much of it since we often had possums and bats around. My room had thin curtains covering the glass doors that led to the balcony. The doors faced the street, and the light from the street lamp usually shone through the curtains. Suddenly, I noticed a shadow moving slowly past the doors. I immediately turned off my reading light and froze. The shadow was tall, definitely not one of my friends or my mom. The person moved cautiously, trying not to be seen. Although they probably couldn't see into my room, I could see them thanks to the streetlights creating a silhouette. They moved out of sight, and I sat there, paralyzed with fear, unsure of what to do. Then, I heard the sound of someone trying to open one of the glass doors leading to my mom's room. I wasn't sure if she had locked them, but I wasn't taking any chances. I hurried to my bedroom door and locked it quietly. The person outside continued to jiggle the door handle, but it didn't budge. Relieved that the door was locked, I hoped they would give up and leave. However, the footsteps moved back to my set of glass doors, and I saw the shadow stop in front of them. I held my breath as a hand reached for the handle. Did I lock those doors myself earlier? What if I forgot? Thankfully, the door remained locked, and the person couldn't get in. They began pacing the balcony, and I was too scared to move or call for help. Tears streamed down my face as I silently prayed for them to leave. Then the person spoke. I could just break the glass, you know. I was terrified, but before I could process what was happening, I saw car headlights turning onto our street. My mom was home. The person on the balcony disappeared, and I heard a thump as they jumped off. When my mom came inside, I was hysterical. I managed to tell her what happened, and she called the police. They never found the person, but a neighbor reported seeing a suspicious truck in the area. The police suspected it might be connected to recent attempted child abductions near my school. It was a terrifying experience, and it made me realize how vulnerable I was. From then on, I made sure to be extra cautious and aware of my surroundings, especially when I was home alone. When I was 11 years old, there was this one night I'll never forget. It was just me and my little brother, who was 7 at the time, home alone. The clock had struck 9 p.m., and outside it was dark and pouring rain. We were huddled in our room, reading, right next to the front door with a big window and open blinds. Suddenly, we heard the front doorbell ring, followed by knocking. My first thought was that it must be our parents returning home, but it seemed odd that they didn't use the garage or their keys. As I approached the door, the sound of a man's voice cut through the wind. "Would you like some cookies? We're selling Girl Scout cookies," he called out. I froze, my heart pounding in my chest. Girl Scout cookies? At this time of night, in this weather, something didn't feel right. Without saying a word, I cautiously checked the peephole and peered through the side window. To my horror, it wasn't a father with his daughter selling cookies, as I had expected. Instead, standing there on our doorstep was a fully grown man, maybe in his late 50s, drenched from the rain. There were no cookies in sight. The feeling in the pit of my stomach turned my blood cold. I knew I had to act fast. The only thing separating us from this stranger was the locks on the door. I hurriedly checked them, making sure they were secure, all the while aware that he could hear every click. But he didn't give up. He kept knocking, repeating his offer of cookies. Panic began to rise within me as I considered calling the police. Then it hit me like a ton of bricks. The blinds in our room were wide open, and my brother was sitting there with the light on, completely unaware of the danger lurking outside. In a split-second decision fueled by fear, I turned off the lights and sprinted to the window, yanking the blinds shut as quickly as I could. I double-checked all the locks in the house and closed every blind, shutting out the outside world. Then I told my brother to go hang out in one of the big closets with no windows, without explaining why. I didn't want to scare him any more than he already was. Strangely, I never called the cops or my parents. I just waited, frozen with fear, until the hallway fell silent, and I knew he was gone. Even now, thinking back on it sends shivers down my spine. So many things could have gone wrong that night. My worst fear is a stranger getting through the unlocked door before I do. It feels like I've had more than my fair share of unsettling encounters with strangers showing up at my house uninvited. From the time I was young, there were instances that made me wary of opening the front door to anyone, especially when I was alone, and especially at night. Let me take you back to one of the scariest nights of my life. It was November 2018, around 6 p.m. in England, meaning it was already pitch black outside. I had just gotten home from work and settled into my room upstairs, watching some YouTube videos on my laptop. My mom popped her head in to let me know she was heading out to pick up my brother from work and would stop by the gas station on the way back. She'd be gone for a little bit, she said, and asked if I wanted to come along. I declined, preferring to stay in the comfort of my room. After my mom closed the front door and pulled out of the driveway, I was left alone in the house. I was 17 at the time, so being home alone wasn't anything new to me. But this particular evening felt different. Maybe it was the eerie darkness outside, or maybe it was just a gut feeling. About 10 minutes after my mom left, I started hearing noises coming from downstairs. At first, I brushed it off, thinking it was just my cat rummaging around. But then I remembered that my cat was sitting at the end of my bed, completely still. The banging on the back door, followed by the sound of keys jangling, immediately sent chills down my spine. I tried to rationalize the situation, telling myself that it must be my brother trying to get outside. He could get angry at times, so the loud banging wasn't out of the ordinary. But as the noises persisted, my fear began to grow. With trembling hands, I crept out of my room and sat on the stairs, straining to hear every sound. It definitely wasn't my brother. I knew I had to confront whatever or whoever was causing the commotion. Summoning all my courage, I made my way into the kitchen, which faced the garden. But as I turned the corner, I heard a loud bang and the sound of footsteps running away. The cat flap had been torn off the door, and there was plastic scattered everywhere. My heart pounded in my chest as I realized the severity of the situation. I called my mom, desperately hoping it was my brother playing a prank. But when he answered her phone from the car, my worst fears were confirmed. He wasn't home. Panic set in as I relayed what was happening to my brother, who urged me to call the police. With trembling hands, I dialed 999 and explained the situation as tears streamed down my face. I retreated back to my room, locking the door behind me, and stayed on the phone with the dispatcher until help arrived. The sound of talking and banging doors downstairs only heightened my fear. When my mom, brother, and the police all arrived at the same time, we discovered the extent of the damage. The intruders had used a broom to break the door handle and snatch the keys through the cat flap. It was a chilling realization that they had been watching our house, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. Thankfully, their attempts to break in were thwarted by sheer luck. The broken door handle made it impossible for them to enter the house, but it was a terrifying reminder of how vulnerable we can be, even in our own homes. One night when I was younger, my mom, Kate, and I had a really scary experience with a broken down car. It was just the two of us at home that night since my dad was working late. It was a windy fall evening, and I remember helping Kate make a late dinner around sunset. We were in the middle of chopping up vegetables when the front doorbell rang. I followed Kate to the door, and she told me to stay out of sight while she opened it a crack to see who was there. There was a man standing outside. He said he had a broken down car and asked if Kate could help with jumper cables. Kate told me to stay inside while she put on her coat and went outside to help him. I watched from the window as Kate brought her car around and got everything set up. After a bit of work, they managed to get the stranger's car started. The man thanked Kate and drove off. It was getting pretty dark by then, so Kate came back inside and we quickly got back to making dinner, hoping to have it ready before my dad got home. About half an hour later, the doorbell rang again. Kate was frustrated with the second interruption, but went to check who it was. I stayed in the kitchen, stirring the pot on the stove. Then, I heard a noise coming from the sliding glass door to my left. It sounded like someone was trying to open it, but it was locked. I set the stirring spoon down and went over to see what was going on. When I got closer to the door, I saw a man's face pressed against the glass. It scared me so much that I stepped back and screamed. It looked like the same man who Kate had helped earlier, wearing a blue jacket. Kate heard my scream and rushed back into the kitchen. She saw the man outside, now trying to force the sliding door open. We immediately called the police and my dad. My dad rushed home as soon as he heard. We went into another room to wait, but by the time anyone arrived, the man had already left. Dinner was forgotten, and we ended up ordering pizza. Kate told my dad and the police everything that happened, but we never saw that man again. I'll never forget the terror I felt when I saw his face against the glass. Last summer, I took a train for the first time. I had to travel a couple of states away, and after checking flight prices, I realized that taking the train was cheaper. Plus, I was excited to try something new since I'd never been on a train before. I packed a small bag for the trip since I was only going to be gone for a few days. When I got to the train station, it was early, and only a few people were waiting. It wasn't crowded like an airport, which was nice, and it felt even less packed than the subway I'd taken before. When the train arrived, we all boarded and found our seats. I picked one by the window, somewhere in the middle of the car. Everything seemed normal, and I was looking forward to the ride. About 20 minutes after we left, I started getting weird text messages. They were from a number I didn't recognize. The first one said, "Hey, I'm on the train with you." I didn't know who it was, so I didn't reply right away. But then another message came through that said, "You better watch your back." I asked who it was, but they didn't answer. Instead, I got more messages, and they started making less and less sense. It was like they were just rambling. I got frustrated and decided to block the number. After that, things were quiet for the rest of the trip. When the train arrived at my destination, I got off and looked around, wondering if I could spot whoever had been texting me. But no one was acting weird or looking at me, so I just moved on. I grabbed a taxi to my hotel, checked in, and unpacked. After I settled in, I saw that I had missed several calls from another number I didn't know. Then I noticed new texts, obviously from the same person. They said they knew what hotel I was staying at and even mentioned it by name. I tried asking who it was, but I got no reply, so I blocked that number too, hoping that would be the end of it. About 30 minutes later, there was a knock at my door. My heart started racing because I had a bad feeling about it. I walked over to the door and looked through the peephole, but no one was there. I brushed it off and went back to what I was doing. Then there was another knock. This time I ran to the door, but again no one was there. Whoever it was must have run away quickly. That was the last straw. I packed up all my things and went to talk to the hotel staff. After explaining the situation, I decided to move to a different hotel. Once I checked in at the new place, I got one more text from a new number, but I blocked it right away. Thankfully, after that, I wasn't bothered again. I never found out who was stalking me or why they were doing it, but I'm glad I trusted my instincts and switched hotels. I used to live in a city with a subway system, and I took the subway to work every day for almost a year. I don't live in that city or have the same job anymore, but I still remember something strange that happened back then. Because of my job, my schedule was all over the place. Sometimes I worked early in the morning, sometimes in the middle of the day, and sometimes late at night. Since I was on the subway at different times, I'd see a variety of people, but there was one guy I started noticing a few months in. At first, it didn't seem weird, but I realized after a while that no matter when I rode the subway morning, day, or night, he was always there, sitting in the same area. He wore a coat or jacket and a hat, had glasses, and had a slight beard. I never saw him miss a day, and it started to feel like he just rode the subway all the time. It was odd because he didn't work with me, and he was the only person I saw so often. I had almost a week off from work, which was a nice break. On my fourth or fifth night off, around 11 p.m., I was in bed watching TV and messing around on my phone. Suddenly, I thought I heard the doorknob to my front door turning, like someone was trying to come in. I lived alone, and my apartment wasn't very big. The front door opened directly to the outside, so I stayed in bed and listened, but after a minute or two, I didn't hear anything else. I got up to check the door, but no one was there. I went back to my room, thinking maybe a neighbor had accidentally tried the wrong door. It's something I'd done before myself. But then, I heard a scratching noise at my bedroom window. My heart jumped. The window was only about 5 feet away from my bed, so I got up quickly and walked over to it. When I lifted the blinds, I couldn't believe it. The guy from the subway was right there, staring at me. As soon as he saw me, he looked away and tried to cover his face, but I knew it was him. I only saw him for a split second, but it was enough to recognize him. He didn't live in my building, and I had no idea why he was there. I opened the window just a crack and asked him what he was doing, but he didn't answer. Instead, he took off down the street, got into a car, and drove away. I never saw that guy on the subway again after that night, and I'm really glad I didn't. Looking back, it creeps me out to think he might have been using the subway just to follow me. My name is Eva, and this is my story. I have a sister named Ivy, and we've always been active kids since childhood. We loved sports, and Ivy in particular was quite the gymnast. She's always been strong and competitive, even with grown-ups. Last year, I decided to apply to the same college where Ivy is a senior. We were raised by our grandparents and our mother since our father passed away when we were very young. Ivy and I have always been adventurous, like that time when we were kids and faced down a wild dog together in the woods. When I started college, I was excited to have Ivy around to watch my back. Our college was bustling with young people full of dreams and ambitions. Ivy introduced me to her friends, including her boyfriend, Mark. I also made some friends of my own, but I always enjoyed spending time with Ivy and her group on the weekends. One Saturday night, Ivy hosted a party at her place. After everyone left, Mark asked if he should stay over, but Ivy wanted some sister time, so he left. I asked Ivy why Mark warned us to be careful before leaving, and she just laughed it off, saying she used to play pranks on her friends. We settled down on the couch with some beer, and I mentioned how my friends had been talking about the dark web recently. Ivy's eyes lit up, and she suggested we play a game on the dark web. She explained it was a treasure hunt game she'd played before and found exciting. Ivy logged onto her laptop, and we entered the game. The interface was dark and eerie, with a skull logo. The game started with a man in a dark alley, and we had to follow clues to find coordinates leading to a treasure location. As we progressed through the game, the clues became increasingly bizarre and unsettling. Ivy seemed excited, but I was starting to feel uneasy. When we reached the final round, a demonic figure appeared on the screen, and the game abruptly ended. Suddenly, Ivy's laptop crashed, which surprised both of us. Despite our efforts, we couldn't get it to work again. I suggested it might be a virus, but Ivy brushed it off, saying it hadn't happened last time she played. She insisted we go to the treasure location indicated by the game's final coordinates. It was already past 2 a.m., but Ivy was determined. I reluctantly agreed, and we set out in her car, with me secretly texting Mark for help. We arrived at an abandoned farmhouse, and Ivy insisted on investigating further. Mark arrived and tried to convince her to leave, but Ivy was stubborn. We entered the farmhouse and discovered evidence of a fire. Ivy found the exact spot indicated by the coordinates and started digging. After some time, we uncovered a black garbage bag buried underground. Ivy opened it and screamed, fainting on the ground. Mark and I found a bloody knife and blood-soaked clothes inside the bag. Terrified, we went to the police the next morning. They determined it was evidence from a murder case, and the killer had tried to hide it. After that incident, Ivy was too scared to play any kind of video game, let alone go on the dark web. It was a disturbing experience that neither of us will ever forget. 4 years back, way before the virus stuff, I started working at Walmart to save cash for college. My bro, who already had a job at a startup, let me crash at his place. After a long week, we'd chill with a couple of friends, order pizza, and watch action flicks. My bro and his buddies would crack jokes and have a few beers, while my buddy Matt and I would game and laugh along. One weekend, things got a bit wild. Jimmy, one of my brother's pals, started talking about the dark web. Matt and I, being curious, paused our game to listen in. Jimmy made it sound like this crazy, mysterious place he'd explored with his work buds. My brother, always up for something new, suggested we give it a shot. So Jimmy got the Tor browser on my bro's laptop, saying it would keep us anonymous. As we started clicking around, checking out the hidden parts of the dark web, we stumbled upon some super messed up stuff. I'm talking about a site with instructions on cooking a woman. Yeah, it was beyond creepy. I spoke up, saying I wasn't cool with what we were doing, but Jimmy just brushed it off, calling the dark web not for kids and teasing me. Then we found this ad for mystery boxes on a kind of secret eBay-like site. The catch was, the boxes were a total mystery, no idea what was inside. Even though I had a bad feeling about it, my brother, who's always jumping into things, suggested we buy one and open it together. I'd read online about these boxes sometimes having evidence of crimes, but nobody listened to me. A week later, my brother got a text about the package's delivery. It was sketchy, talking about a non-refundable purchase paid with bitcoins. Feeling uneasy, I insisted we all go pick it up together. When we got there, under this bridge, we found the package just sitting there, like someone had ditched it. Back at home, we gathered to open it up. The excitement in the air was thick, but I couldn't shake this feeling like something bad was about to happen. As we tore into the box, we found leather stuff, belts, a handbag, socks. But these weren't normal leather goods. The socks, they were made from human skin, with hairs and even bits of flesh still stuck to them. Panic set in as we realized what we were looking at. My brother's phone buzzed with another text, this time directing us to a website selling human leather. Without wasting a second, we grabbed everything and burned it all. Then my brother changed his phone number. That experience was enough to keep me far away from the dark web for good. Some things are just better off unseen. Late nights at the office weren't uncommon, especially when there was a big project looming over my head. Our office was located in a large 2-story building within a business complex, and sometimes staying late was the only way to catch up on work. I had taken a couple of sick days the previous week, so I was feeling the pressure to get my project done. That night, I planned to stay a few hours late, and then come back the next night to finish up. Typically, there were others who stayed late with me, but on this particular night, I found myself alone. I sat at my desk, surrounded by rows of empty desks, typing away on my laptop. As the night wore on, fatigue started to set in. Despite my best efforts to stay awake, I found myself growing drowsy. I decided to make some coffee in the break room to help keep me alert. As I waited for the coffee to brew, I leaned against the table, struggling to keep my eyes open. Suddenly, a loud thud echoed through the building, jolting me awake. It sounded like it came from downstairs, but there were no follow-up noises. I hesitated at the doorway, debating whether to investigate. Exhaustion won out, and I convinced myself it was probably just something falling in one of the rooms downstairs. I grabbed my coffee mug and returned to my desk, trying to focus on my work. But despite the caffeine boost, I couldn't shake off my sleepiness. I pushed through for another hour, but eventually, fatigue got the best of me, and I dozed off at my desk. When I woke up, I felt disoriented and irritated. There was a faint beeping noise coming from somewhere in the building, but I couldn't pinpoint its source. Glancing at the time on my laptop, I realized it was nearly 2 a.m. Deciding it was futile to continue working, I packed up my things and headed out to investigate the beeping. As I made my way down the staircase, the beeping grew louder, and a sense of unease settled over me. I reached the main hallway and spotted a metal rod lying on the ground near the entrance door, which should have been locked. It dawned on me that the beeping was from the building's security system. With a surge of adrenaline, I ran to the opposite end of the hallway and out the back door, where I could safely call for help. The police arrived and conducted a thorough search of the premises, but they found no trace of the intruder. Reviewing the security footage revealed the chilling truth of what had happened. At 11 p.m., a man had approached the building and effortlessly broken in with a single strike from a tool. The bang I had heard while getting coffee was the sound of the door being breached. He had silently made his way through the building, eventually reaching the office where I was working. He stood just a few feet behind me while I typed away, completely unaware of his presence. Later, when I had fallen asleep, he returned, rummaging through the office and even coming up to my desk. It wasn't clear if he had stolen anything, as not every room was covered by security cameras. His motives remained a mystery, but the footage was enough to send shivers down my spine. I vowed never to stay alone in that office again. This happened in 2007. I was just 19 when this incident occurred. It was a late night, and I found myself walking home from work all alone, with no one to give me a ride. At that time, I didn't even have a phone. The most challenging part was that it was 2 a.m. in the morning. The silver lining was that my home was less than a mile away. A mere 10-minute walk on a night like that. I was feeling under the weather, catching the onset of a cold. Adding to the discomfort was the freezing weather, well below freezing, being February in Wisconsin. I swear, I had barely been walking for about 2 minutes when a truck rolled up behind me. I thought, great, as it stopped right behind me, and the driver, a frail-looking man in his mid-30s, called out, "Hey cutie, you need a ride? It's freezing out here. I have the heat on in the truck." I looked at him with disgust and shook my head. Though it was slightly tempting, I couldn't bring myself to accept. I knew it was extremely dangerous to get into a car with a stranger late at night, even if he claimed to be offering help. I never would have known his true intentions, but I didn't want to take that risk. He drove away, seemingly offended, but I was just relieved he was gone. If I were sure he wouldn't harm me, I might have considered letting him take me home, but dealing with a random creepy man wasn't something I wanted to entertain. After about 2 minutes, he rolled back around, this time coming from the opposite direction. With only 4 or 5 minutes left in my walk, anxiety crept in. I was scared to see him again. What did he want now? He rolled up right next to me on a long stretch of road. I started wondering. Did I not accept the ride because he thought I found him sketchy? Was it the way he looked? I had a horrible feeling when he pulled up next to me again. I was doing some thinking as he mumbled, "Where are you going?" "Just to the apartment complex down there off of Brady Road," I replied. He suggested I hop in, and at that point I was annoyed and over being cold. I convinced myself that the chances of him trying to hurt me were low, or at least that's what I told myself. I agreed to let him take me home. He jumped out of his truck with an abnormal amount of excitement, almost like a little kid. It gave me the ick and almost changed my mind. He walked over to my side, opened the door for me, and eagerly told me to get in. As I prepared to enter, I saw a pistol under the passenger seat and a pair of handcuffs in plain sight in the middle console. Without saying a word, I decided to book it. No screams, just a run through a nearby cornfield, which happened to be a shortcut to my apartment. I heard him screaming and hurling names at me as he burned rubber, disappearing without a trace. He didn't attempt to chase me. When I got home, I shared the entire frightening encounter with my roommate. She urged me to call the police, but in my tired and shaken state, I chose not to. Perhaps it was a lapse in judgment, but all I wanted was to be home in bed, finally able to relax after such a long day. Looking back, I doubt he had any intention of taking me to my apartment. It was likely a ruse to lure me into his truck. I should have trusted my instincts and stuck with my initial decision. A lesson learned. Christmas of 2017 unfolded with an unexpected twist, casting shadows on what was supposed to be a joyous celebration. At 19 years old, I, Alex, found myself entangled in a chilling tale that would forever alter the way I perceived the holiday season. Our family had gathered at our Uncle Richard's place for the holidays, departing from our usual Connecticut setting to embrace the warmth of downtown Miami. As Christmas Eve approached, my brother Jake and I, fueled by the energy of youth and the vibrant Miami atmosphere, decided to venture out into the city, known for its lively nightlife. Excitement filled the air as we heard about various Christmas-themed parties taking place at clubs and bars. Jake, equipped with a fake ID, and I thought it would be a night to remember. Our journey led us to a club on Miami Beach hosting a Christmas-themed event. Despite the festive ambience, our enthusiasm waned when we encountered an exorbitant entrance fee and a vigilant bouncer who exposed Jake's use of a fake ID. Undeterred, we sought an alternative venue and eventually gained entry to another club. Santa hats dotted the crowd, contributing to the holiday spirit. At the bar, an older woman in her mid-40s, wearing a blue Santa hat and a provocatively themed Christmas sweater, struck up a conversation with Jake. Her unusual fondness for younger guys with Hispanic accents raised my eyebrows, but Jake, perhaps flattered, immersed himself in the conversation. Leaving Jake to his newfound company, I decided to make friends with fellow patrons at the bar. However, my solace was interrupted when Jake patted me on the shoulder, announcing his departure with the mysterious woman. Supportive and curious, I wished him well and called an Uber, assuming he would spend the night with his newfound acquaintance. During the Uber ride, my phone rang with Jake's caller ID. Static filled the line, and I overheard unfamiliar male voices in the background. Suddenly, the call disconnected, leaving me with a sense of foreboding. Concerned, I attempted to call Jake multiple times, but to no avail. Finally, a call came through, but it wasn't Jake on the other end. An older man with a deep voice claimed to have found Jake's phone on the sidewalk. Desperate for answers, I asked the stranger to drop the phone off at Uncle Richard's place or meet me somewhere. The request was met with silence, replaced by distant talking and sudden screams. It was Jake's voice crying out for help. The connection abruptly terminated, plunging me into a state of panic. Distraught and fearing the worst, I instructed the Uber driver to pull over. Alone in the dark, I dialed every family member's number, desperately attempting to share the alarming situation. With no one answering, the Uber driver urged me to contact the police immediately. Law enforcement arrived at Uncle Richard's place, where I roused my family from their holiday slumber, informing them of Jake's perilous situation. Desperation led me to provide a detailed description of the woman from the bar and the approximate time Jake left the establishment. My father accompanied by the police, and I revisited the bar, hoping to unravel the mystery. Amidst the chaos, a random number illuminated my phone screen. It was Jake, gasping for breath, explaining that he had narrowly escaped a kidnapping. Using a stranger's phone, he shared the harrowing details of the trap set in motion after leaving the bar with the woman who claimed to have ordered an Uber. The pickup point, concealed in a desolate back alley, revealed the malicious intent behind the seemingly innocent ride. Two assailants in the car subdued Jake, threatening him with violence if he made a sound. As the car traversed the streets, one of the men dialed my number, intensifying the threats. In a daring move, Jake screamed for help, resulting in the visible aftermath of a bloody face and black eyes. When the car finally stopped and Jake was no longer restrained, he seized the opportunity to escape. The assailants sped away, leaving him battered and robbed on a dimly lit street in North Miami. Although shaken and traumatized, Jake's escape marked a triumphant victory over the sinister plot. Despite extensive efforts, the police failed to identify the woman from the bar, and none of the assailants wore masks, leaving Jake to contemplate the lingering threat to his life. The holiday weekend, initially intended for joyous celebrations, had morphed into a nightmare, overshadowing the festivities with fear and uncertainty. On Christmas night, the echoes of Jake's screams pierced the tranquility, disrupting the peaceful slumber of our family. His frantic exclamations of "She's in the house" revived the haunting memory of the mysterious woman from the bar and compelled me to face a sleepless night, vigilantly guarding against an unseen menace. A few years back, my brother Jake and I invested in a cozy little house, making it our joint abode. The inaugural year in our new dwelling was marked by hosting a Christmas gathering, an attempt to showcase our humble abode to family members who hadn't convened in quite some time. Our intimate family consisted of our parents, aunt, uncle, cousin, sister, and her 2 young nephews. The preparations for the festive celebration commenced with our sister and her family arriving first, equipped with culinary skills to assist in the kitchen. Their dog, Mika, tagged along for the holiday adventure. Given the 2-hour journey from their residence, they decided to spend the night at our place. The rest of our family lived within an hour's distance, ensuring they wouldn't be joining us in the overnight stay. Not that our quaint house had much space for additional guests. During our Christmas dinner, the conversation took an unexpected turn towards the recent murders in our area. Bodies had been discovered in the local woods, casting a brief shadow over the holiday cheer. Sensing the discomfort, our mom and sister swiftly redirected the discussion for the sake of the festivities and the children. Following the sumptuous dinner, we retreated to the living room, indulging in a Christmas movie with a background of laughter and merriment. As the night progressed, family members gradually bid their farewells, leaving only Jake and me, along with my sister, her husband, and their children. The kids, weary from the day's excitement, retired to bed early, while the 4 of us continued to savor the holiday spirit with a few more glasses of wine. Beyond 10 p.m., my girlfriend made a surprise visit, her family having dispersed for the night. As Christmas night unfolded, we eventually retired to bed, bidding farewell to the joyous celebrations. The serenity of the night was abruptly shattered when my girlfriend shook me awake in the darkened room. Groggily glancing at the clock, I noted it was past 2 a.m. In a hushed tone, she implored me to listen. Straining my ears, I heard Mika's low growls emanating from the hallway. Curiosity overcoming my drowsiness, I ventured into the hall to investigate. To my astonishment, the back door of our house stood wide open, allowing a chilling breeze to permeate the room. Mika, fixated on the doorway, heightened my sense of unease. Concerned, I checked the surroundings, and that's when I heard Jake's voice calling my name from the darkness outside. His distant calls suggested he was somewhere in the woods, sparking worry that he might be in trouble or in need of assistance. Returning to my room, I briefed my girlfriend, swiftly donning shoes and a coat. Armed with a flashlight, I stepped outside, revealing a light dusting of snow on the ground and faint footprints, leading from the back door toward the woods. Yelling Jake's name, I received responses that confirmed he was indeed in the woods. However, as I ventured deeper, his footprints gradually faded, rendering them nearly impossible to follow. The woods, veiled in darkness, instilled a sense of discomfort, dissuading me from venturing too far. Attempting to reach Jake on his phone proved futile, prompting me to press on cautiously. Yet the calls from Jake ceased, and an eerie silence enveloped the woods, devoid of any sound save for the cold breeze. Suddenly my phone rang, offering a glimmer of hope. It was my girlfriend. To my bewilderment, she informed me that Jake was in his bedroom at that very moment. The revelation clashed with the reality of hearing Jake's voice in the woods. Disturbed and disoriented, I asked her to confirm if my sister's husband was still on one of the pull-out couches. After a brief check, she affirmed his presence. A sudden wave of unease swept over me, as if an unseen presence lurked in the woods, ready to pounce from any direction. Swiftly retracing my steps, I sprinted back towards the backyard light visible through the trees. Returning to the safety of our house, I found everyone awake, their faces etched with horror as I recounted Mika's growls, the open back door, and the mysterious footprints leading into the woods. The most unsettling aspect was the conviction that the voice I heard belonged to Jake, and whoever it was knew my name. Contemplating whether to involve the police, we deliberated for half an hour before deciding to make the call. A police officer arrived, posed routine questions about stolen items or potential threats, and left after assuring us to contact them if anything unusual recurred. Despite the lingering fear, nothing else transpired after that night. The inexplicable events in the woods remained a perplexing mystery, refusing to yield any logical explanations. To this day, the mere thought of venturing into as soon as I started driving dark. For the first few years, I never needed to use it until my long-distance solo trip from Ohio to North Carolina. However, it turned out to not be as useful as I'd hoped. I was traveling to visit my long-distance boyfriend in college, so none of my friends or family wanted to go with me. About 3 hours away from my destination, I stopped to fill up on gas in West Virginia. Unfortunately, I wasn't paying close enough attention to which exit I decided to stop at, so I happened to pick an exit that was basically just a crossing with the rural highway where the nearest gas station was a mile down the road. A quarter mile before I pulled into the gas station, I ran over something and started leaking air out of my front passenger side tire. At that point, there was no turning around and getting off at the next exit. I drew a lot of attention to myself as I came to a stop away from the pumps, but I tried to make a short work of getting out and spraying on a thick coat of a can of Fix-A-Flat I kept in my car. By the time I got to it, however, a lot of air had leaked out of the tire, and the gas station I stopped at was so old and worn out that the only air pump they had was broken. I also didn't have a spare, so it was starting to look like my only option was to call AAA and see how long it would take them to get there. To my disappointment, they said I was in such a remote area that the nearest truck wouldn't be able to get there to change my tire or tow me away for another 5 hours, and by then it would be well past dark outside, and I did not want to be stuck there. My next thought was to call my boyfriend and see if I could borrow his spare tire, but the solutions there weren't great either. It would be dark by the time he got to me, too, and we'd either have to leave my car in that sketchy gas station overnight or change the tire there in the dark, then drive all the way to Raleigh on a donut. I decided to call him back in a few minutes while I thought about the options, and that's when one of the men hanging around the gas station knocked on my window. He was just the sort of guy anyone would expect to linger at a place like that, missing teeth, tobacco stains on his lips, saggy, wrinkly skin. I reluctantly rolled down my window and asked what he wanted. "I'm looking to help you out, ma'am," he said. "My brother owns a car shop a few miles up the road. If you give me a ride there, I can talk to him and he'll fix you up and get you back on the road." I really didn't want to let him into my car, but then again, I didn't want to be stuck there for hours with him around the whole time. I offered up some excuses, but he saw through all of them. I think he knew nobody else was going to help me out for a while yet. That only made me more suspicious of him. I did decide to go inside the store and buy some gas on my credit card, so he would be aware that I could be tracked there if he decided to do anything, and the whole time I kept a tight grip on the stun gun in my purse. During that time, I considered the best course of action. None of them were good. Staying there out in the open like a sitting duck seemed like it would only bring more bad elements. So I eventually made the decision to tempt fate and give the guy a chance. I kept one hand on the steering wheel and one with my stun gun in case he tried anything as he directed me down the road. On the way, he asked me some very clear red flag questions about where I was from, where I was going, and if anyone expected me. I gave the most deterring responses, but the ride dragged on for longer than I wanted to. Apparently, just a few miles to him was 15 miles. Finally, the mechanic shop appeared. I pulled in and the man got out to talk to the older guy inside the shop who was working on a suspended car. I had half a mind to peel out right then and there, but instead I waited with the windows down and listened to their conversation as best I could. It went something like this. "That's a good candidate, right?" said the hitchhiker. Suddenly, the mechanic slapped his brother across the face. "Shut up!" he shouted, then pulled him in by the collar and pointed across the road. I followed the line and saw it was pretty clearly a black unmarked police cruiser looking right at the shop. "I'm sorry," the hitchhiker yelled. "I forgot." "You forgot," the mechanic growled. "You forgot me telling you to stop bringing people here? Get her the hell out of here." From there, the conversation turned quiet. A few minutes later, the hitchhiker returned to my car, suddenly in a pissy mood. "He's going to change your tire now." "You got cash?" he asked. I shook my head. "Well, then it's free of charge," he muttered. Then he sauntered off down the road and disappeared to God knows where. The mechanic fixed my car, but other than that, he pretended like I wasn't there. He acted like he was being watched, and after everything I saw, I'm sure he was. After an hour or so, I finally got back on the road and never looked back. I count my lucky stars every time I think about that day. What in the world was I thinking? I don't have the slightest idea why I let that guy into my car. Those guys were clearly bad news, but apparently the cops in the area were on their case. That's the only reason I made it out of there. I'm a 24-year-old woman, and I began working as a babysitter to help my parents cover my college expenses. We weren't financially well off, and I aimed to avoid relying on student loans. Initially, I babysat for neighbors, but my reputation for taking good care of kids spread, leading to more requests from parents, especially on weekends and special events. Most of the children I babysat were easy to handle, making me enjoy the job. The experience sparked an interest in changing my college major to something related to working with kids, such as childcare. Babysitting became more than just a source of income. It ignited a strong desire to protect the kids under my care. One Friday night, instead of hanging out with friends, I opted to babysit for one of the families I regularly helped. Driving my old Jetta to their sizable home in a fancy neighborhood, I appreciated their nice house and generous payment. The parents were already at the door, exchanging quick goodbyes before hurrying off to a fancy event. The family had 2 boys, a 5-year-old and a 1-year-old, both already asleep when I arrived. With little to do until the parents returned, I contemplated watching a movie, but feared waking the kids. Remembering the lady of the house had a collection of romance novels, I decided to indulge in some reading. Sitting in the dimly lit kids' room, with a nightlight providing enough illumination, I moved a sofa closer to the window to glance at the street outside. Engrossed in a captivating book, I suddenly noticed movement outside the window. Assuming it was the parents returning, my relief turned to fear when I spotted 2 guys in dark clothes, one with a mask covering his face. Frozen with fear, I reached for my phone, calling the lady, but she didn't answer. Unable to contact the man in time, the 2 guys approached the house, and I realized they were trying to find a way inside. Fortunately, I had locked all the doors and checked them again before going upstairs. Dialing 911, I explained the situation, and the dispatcher instructed me to gather everyone in the house and find a safe hiding spot. Concerned the police wouldn't arrive quickly enough, I grappled with the decision to escape, but couldn't leave the 2 sleeping kids behind. Panic set in as I wondered where to hide, fearing for my safety. The tension escalated when I heard the sound of breaking glass downstairs. Time was running out. Securing the door with a chair, I rushed to get the baby carrier from the closet, silently placing the baby inside. The older brother woke up, and before he could make a sound, I covered his mouth. Footsteps approached, and the men attempted to force their way in. The older boy joined us on the roof, and we found ourselves stuck, unsure of where to go. As the men broke in, we huddled in the corner of the roof, the baby still sleeping. and the boy holding on to me tightly. Terrified, I silently cried, praying for help. When one of the men discovered us, our eyes met, and for a moment I feared the worst. However, he turned away and alerted his partner to our supposed escape. With the police closing in, the men fled, jumping over the fence. Sirens approached, and the police found us on the roof. Shaken, they brought us back inside. The kids' parents returned shortly after, and my parents arrived too. The fear lingered, but I felt a strange sense of relief that the men didn't catch us, especially the one who seemed hesitant to harm us. I'm 27 and reside alone in a rural house, surrounded by a few neighbors half a mile down the road. While I engage in occasional conversations with them, I mostly keep to myself and venture into town only when necessary. Being half retired, I spend the majority of my time at home, dedicating a few months each year to contracting work. On this particular late fall day, I found myself organizing my equipment scattered in the yard, preparing for the impending winter. Among the assortment of tools and lawn mowers left out in the yard, I noticed something unusual. An unfamiliar man walking along the road that connected to my driveway. Strangely, he carried nothing with him, no backpack or camping gear. To add context, the road was entirely deserted, save for a few houses like mine, and the nearest town was a 4-hour walk away. Intrigued, I observed him until he vanished into the distance. After he disappeared, I scanned both directions of the road and saw no cars on either side. It was peculiar, but eventually I shrugged off the odd encounter and resumed my yard work. Back inside before dark, I prepared dinner, attempting to shake off the lingering unease. However, a sudden thud from outside disrupted my meal, startling me from the table. The sound resembled a wooden thump, seemingly originating from the direction of the shed. Peering through the window into the yard, my eyes widened. The shed door was wide open. Although the door was old, it had never unlatched on its own before. Uncertain of what transpired, a sense of unease settled over me, urging me to investigate, and at the very least, close the door. Grabbing my rifle, I walked cautiously towards the shed, listening intently for any signs of disturbance. The quietness of the night prevailed, and upon reaching the open shed door, I illuminated the interior with my flashlight. A thorough search revealed nothing out of place, and no signs of animals or intruders were evident. After securing the shed door, an eerie feeling enveloped me as I made my way back through the field towards my house. The quiet night seemed to intensify the sense of foreboding, and upon reaching the front door, an unsettling discovery awaited: a line of dirty shoe prints leading from the hallway. Locking the door behind me, I flicked on the hallway light, following the trail of prints to the spare bedroom. My heart raced as I raised my rifle, approaching the door with caution. Leaning my head against the wood, I discerned what sounded like someone breathing on the other side. Before I could decide on a course of action, the handle twisted from my grip, and the door swung open. Startled, I jumped back, rifle raised as a man, holding a massive metal shovel, appeared ready to charge at me. My gun seemed to halt him in his tracks, but the anger in his eyes remained palpable. Fear and confusion overwhelmed me as I yelled for him to stay back, my attempt at intimidation undercut by undeniable terror. The man maintained his distance, fury etched on his face. In the strange silence that followed, he suddenly threw the shovel in my direction and sprinted back into the room. Reacting instinctively, I ran in to see him crawling out of the window. Conflicted, I hesitated. Part of me wanted to stop him, but another part couldn't muster the resolve. He leaped out, disappearing into the vast empty night, leaving me with no way of knowing his whereabouts or intentions. To this day, the man remains unidentified, and his motives remain shrouded in mystery. All I can assert is that if I hadn't clutched my rifle or if he had caught me off guard, I likely wouldn't be here today. I was 16 at the time, enjoying the beginning of summer with no school obligations or job commitments. Most of my days were spent indoors, engrossed in video games, YouTube, or simply relaxing. On this particular night, my parents were out of town, leaving me with the house, a familiar occurrence that never caused much concern. Sometimes I'd invite friends over, but that night I relished the solitude. As the hours passed, I found myself immersed in a rerun of my favorite show on Netflix, simultaneously scrolling through my phone. It must have been around 11 or 12 when an unexpected knock echoed at the front door. I halted the TV and headed to see who it was. The late hour almost slipped my mind, but thankfully, caution set in before I carelessly swung the door open. Peering through the peephole, I spotted two men donned in similar attire, patiently waiting for me to respond. I hesitated, debating whether to acknowledge my presence by asking what they wanted. Opting for silence, I observed, anticipating their departure. A few seconds later, they called out, "Hello, we're here looking to speak with Mr. and Mrs. Ian," a reference to my parents, although I've changed the name for privacy. Confused, I remained silent, fully aware that it was far too late for any legitimate visitors. After a minute, the men exchanged glances, uttered something quietly, and walked off the porch. The outdoor lights were off, preventing me from seeing where they went. The absence of headlights or cars raised suspicions. Had they walked here? Returning to the TV, I left it on pause to detect any signs of their return. Within minutes, I heard footsteps outside the house. They approached the porch, but instead of knocking, they made their way around to the side of the house. Rushing to the back window, I witnessed them entering the backyard through the open fence. Hiding from view, I overheard them approaching the back door, engaging in conversation and attempting to tamper with the lock. This was my opportunity. I grabbed my phone and stealthily retreated to the safety of the garage. With trembling hands, I called the police, detailing the unfolding break-in. In less than a minute, a loud pop resonated through the house, and the back door slid open. The intruder's footsteps traversed the house, ascending the stairs toward the bedrooms. The door creaked open, allowing them entry, but afterward, an eerie silence enveloped the house. 10 excruciating minutes later, the police arrived. As they approached, quick footsteps upstairs suggested the two men were now arguing. Some officers entered through the back door, rushing upstairs, while another assisted me outside. The intruders offered no resistance, nor did they provide any explanation for their presence. Despite weeks passing and the realization that their motives extended beyond a simple robbery, the charges laid against them were limited to breaking and entering. The unsettling feeling lingered. These individuals seemed to be searching for my parents, and it felt as if they intended to wait upstairs until their return from the trip. Reflecting on that night, I grapple with the uncertainty of whether revealing myself could have prevented the break-in. Something about their behavior, however, suggests that they were determined, and no amount of intervention would have deterred them from whatever nefarious plans they had in mind. This incident unfolded about 3 years ago when I found myself in a rental house while visiting my brother, who resided a 6-hour drive away from me. Our infrequent meetings were due to the limited space in his one-bedroom apartment, which necessitated my stay elsewhere when I visited him. The rental house was conveniently close to his apartment, offering a practical alternative to nearby hotels at a comparable price. Arriving in town early in the morning, I spent the day with my brother, grabbing lunch and picking up groceries before returning to the rental around 5 p.m. The accommodations were modest, featuring a couch, a TV, and a bed. Given the reasonable cost, my expectations weren't high. I stayed up until around 9 p.m., eager for a restful night's sleep after a long day. However, sleep proved elusive as I lay in bed, awake for longer than anticipated. Finally succumbing to slumber after an hour, I awoke in the pitch darkness of the night. A sense of foreboding enveloped me as I discerned the stillness of the surroundings. Before I could check the time, I heard faint footsteps outside the room, slowly traversing the hallway, followed by the soft closing of a door, plunging the space into silence. Frozen in my bed, I contemplated the situation for what felt like an eternity. When no more sounds echoed through the house, I mustered the courage to investigate. Peering down the hallway, I could see the front door at the far end, the source of the soft closing I had heard. Unsure if the intruder remained within or had departed, I cautiously explored the other rooms, finding no trace except for the unlocked front door. After securing all the locks and calling 911, the authorities arrived promptly, but offered little assistance beyond advising me to ensure all doors were locked and to contact the owner. The night unfolded with me on edge, unable to sleep. Following a call to the rental owner and a discussion about the unsettling events, I sought refuge with my brother, relieved to learn that the owner had changed the PIN code on the door. Returning to the rental late the next day, I settled on the couch, feeling a mix of sleepiness and lingering nervousness about the intrusion. Every attempt to close my eyes triggered fear of the intruder's return. Realizing the importance of a good night's sleep, I decided to comb through the house once more, hoping to alleviate my anxieties. Moving through the living room and kitchen, I proceeded down the hallway to the bedroom. Checking the closet and attached bathroom, I heard sudden footsteps sprinting towards the bedroom I occupied. Swinging around the corner, I caught a fleeting glimpse of a large man before he forcefully slammed the bedroom door shut. The sound of his departing footsteps resonated, moving towards the living room while I remained rooted in place. The man traversed the living room and kitchen, staying within the house for what felt like an eternity. The front door creaked open, and then it slammed shut behind him. Another call to the police brought a swift response, with the homeowner joining them this time. The living room and kitchen bore signs of a struggle, with furniture scattered and cabinets ransacked. Despite the apparent chaos, nothing seemed to be missing upon closer inspection. Leaving the rental, I opted for a hotel, and within days, updates on the incident ceased. The intruder was never apprehended, leaving me with numerous unanswered questions. The unsettling realization that he had managed to evade detection during my initial search haunted me. Was he observing me? How long had he lurked within the house with me? The mysteries lingered, adding an extra layer of unease to the already distressing encounter. It was a typical evening, the clock inching towards midnight as I donned my blue Walmart vest and prepared for another night of stocking shelves. The store was eerily quiet, with only the distant hum of refrigerators and the occasional creaking of shopping carts echoing through the vast aisles. My task for the night was straightforward, restocking the grocery section. As I methodically filled the shelves with cereal boxes and canned goods, the monotony was disrupted by a faint whispering. At first, I dismissed it as the hum of the ventilation system, but as I listened more closely, the whispers took on a distinct, almost human quality. I shook off the uneasy feelings settling in my gut, attributing the auditory oddity to fatigue and the empty expanses of the deserted store. But as the whispers persisted, I couldn't ignore the growing sense that I was not alone. As the clock neared 1 a.m., I ventured into the frozen foods section. The aisles seemed to stretch endlessly into darkness, the freezer cases casting long shadows that danced on the tiled floor. That's when I saw it, a fleeting silhouette at the edge of my peripheral vision, darting behind a towering stack of frozen pizzas. I froze, my heart pounding in my chest. "Hello," I called out, but the only response was the low hum of refrigeration units. I hesitated for a moment, contemplating whether to investigate further or dismiss it as a trick of tired eyes. Curiosity got the better of me, and I cautiously approached the area where I saw the shadowy figure. The freezer's frosty air sent shivers down my spine as I peered around the corner, half expecting an employee on an unscheduled break or a mischievous customer playing hide and seek. To my surprise, there was no one there. The frozen food aisle stood empty, the only movement coming from the flickering fluorescent lights overhead. I scanned the shelves, searching for any sign of a hidden intruder, but the only sound was the distant hum of the store's machinery. Shaking off the eerie encounter, I continued my rounds, convincing myself that fatigue had played tricks on my perception. However, the night was far from over, and Walmart had more in store for me than just mundane restocking. As I moved to the electronics section, the glow of TVs and the soft whirring of gaming consoles surrounded me. The dimly lit aisle seemed to stretch endlessly, punctuated by the intermittent glow of price tags and the flickering light of malfunctioning bulbs. It was then that I heard the unmistakable sound of footsteps, echoing through the emptiness. I turned, expecting to see a fellow employee or maybe a customer who had lingered after closing hours, but the aisle remained empty. The footsteps continued, growing louder and closer, as if someone invisible was pacing towards me. My grip tightened on the cart I pushed, my ears straining to discern the source of the phantom footsteps. Each step resonated through the silence, creating an unsettling rhythm that reverberated through the otherwise quiet store. "Who's there?" I called out, the echo of my own voice amplifying the emptiness around me. The footsteps abruptly ceased, leaving behind a lingering sense of foreboding. I stood there, half expecting a response, but the only reply was the hollow hum of the store's ventilation. As I proceeded to the clothing section, I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. The rows of neatly arranged apparel seemed to conceal hidden eyes, and the air grew thick with an inexplicable tension. That's when the clothing racks began to sway, gently at first, then with increasing intensity. The hangers clinked together, creating a discordant melody that resonated through the silent department. I scanned the aisles for any sign of movement, but there was none. I approached the swaying racks cautiously, my senses on high alert. The air seemed charged with an unseen energy, and a cold breeze brushed against my skin. It was then that I heard the soft, mournful wail, a sound that seemed to emanate from the very fabric of the clothing. "Help me," the voice whispered, a desperate plea that sent a shiver down my spine. I strained to locate the source, my eyes darting between the racks, but the voice remained elusive, as if carried by the very essence of the store itself. A sudden gust of wind swept through the aisle, extinguishing nearby overhead lights. The clothing racks ceased their swaying, and the silence that followed was deafening. I stood there, enveloped in darkness, my breath catching in my throat. The lights flickered back to life, revealing the clothing section in its mundane stillness. The voice had vanished, leaving behind an unsettling calm. I hesitated, contemplating whether to continue my shift or abandon the eerie aisles altogether. As the night wore on, each section of Walmart held its own peculiar brand of suspense, from inexplicable whispers in the grocery aisles to phantom footsteps in electronics and the haunting voices in the clothing department. The store, seemingly alive with unseen forces, revealed a side that transcended the ordinary. By the time the first light of dawn filtered through the skylights, I found myself at the exit, the night shift finally coming to an end. As I stepped out into the cool morning air, Walmart stood silent, its shelves and aisles devoid of the mysterious occurrences that had unfolded just hours before. The events of that night lingered in my memory, leaving me with an inexplicable unease whenever I set foot in the store. Walmart, a place of commerce and consumerism, had revealed its hidden shadows, and I couldn't shake the feeling that, beneath the fluorescent lights and neatly arranged shelves, something else resided, something that watched, whispered, and moved through the aisles when the world slept. In high school, my friends and I used to walk to McDonald's after the last class of the day. We did this almost every day of the week. A few of my friends lived in town too, so it worked out well. If we got bored of walking the streets, visiting fast food places, checking out Goodwill, or playing basketball, we would go to a friend's house to hang out until his mom got home. Sometimes she was okay with us all hanging out there, but more often than not, she would ask us to leave. It was understandable, considering it was a small house, and having a bunch of energetic teens over every day after work could be challenging, especially when we caused a ruckus. We weren't troublemakers, but we did smoke weed and stuff like that. Looking back, I wish I didn't smoke so much at such a young age. Now I don't smoke or drink at all. Nothing against it, it's just not for me. I wish we took our mental and physical health more seriously as kids. One day after school, my friends walked to McDonald's. I usually didn't have money, but this time I did. I walked up to the register and bought a Mandem McFlurry, my favorite. That day, McDonald's was quiet and not busy at all, which was unusual. There was only one other customer besides us, and they left shortly after we arrived. Taking advantage of having McDonald's to ourselves, we became loud and obnoxious. We were all high, and the excitement was short-lived. A man named Billy approached us. He had long brown hair, looked old, and had a creepy demeanor. He introduced himself, and when he mentioned his name, Preston burst out laughing, triggering the rest of us into a small chuckle. Preston couldn't contain himself, and I felt bad for the man, but it was just funny. Billy gave Preston a menacing look, and it seemed like he was trying to hold back his rage. Billy worked there and threatened to kick us out. After apologizing, we got him to walk away, but it was strange because he didn't wear a uniform and acted abnormally for a worker. Later, we found out from the general manager that Billy didn't actually work there anymore. He was fired years ago for attempting to stab a customer in the parking lot over a wrong order complaint. Billy was arrested, deemed mentally incompetent, and sent to a mental institution. Despite the police being called on him multiple times, he kept showing up at McDonald's. Eventually, he got arrested for trespassing, breaking his probation, and went back to jail or the mental institution. While not the scariest story, it's something that really happened. We stopped going to that McDonald's as much and opted for Taco Bell or Subway. I empathize with Billy's mental illness, but at some point, we have to keep such individuals off the streets to keep everyone safe. The streets need to be a safe place, especially for kids, and we wouldn't want them to encounter someone as unpredictable and potentially dangerous as Billy. I used to work at a McDonald's for about a year right after I finished high school. Working there was a decent job for me. I made a few friends with coworkers, and I didn't love the job, but I didn't hate it either. Mostly, I worked behind the counter taking orders or passing out food to customers. One busy Saturday, I found myself working a shift starting in the morning and ending in the afternoon. The place was really busy. Our location always got tons of customers, being close to a shopping center. With it being the weekend, it drew many people in, and time flew by as we scrambled to keep up. There were quite a few of us working, and I remember at one point, probably about 1 p.m., the place was really crowded. I got an order to hand out to a customer, and I called the number. A woman walked up and accepted it, then walked away, only to return about a minute later. When she did, she was extremely upset. She sought me out and told me that this was not her order. She then angrily demanded her real order. I asked her for her order number, and when she told it to me, I realized that she had grabbed the wrong one. The number that I had called was different. This was her mistake. I told her that her order would be out soon, but she demanded a refund and said that it should be free. That's when I tried explaining the whole situation to her. It ended up being a total disaster. The place was loud, and the woman would not listen to my explanation. It's like she could not accept the fact that she had made the mistake. Honestly, it made me really frustrated, but I kept my cool. Eventually, I called over a manager to help resolve the situation. I remember the woman specifically reading my name off my name tag and telling it to my manager as if I should get in trouble for this. I just kind of stood there. My manager then told me that she would handle the situation and I could go back to work helping the others. The woman was raising her voice and causing a scene. Just about everybody else in earshot was looking over and staring. At last, after maybe 10 minutes, the woman ended up taking her order and finally leaving. I did my best to forget about it and continue with my work. I helped other customers like normal for about 15 more minutes, and then it was time for my break. During that time when I worked there, I liked to take my breaks in my car. It was quiet and peaceful away from the busy McDonald's. I would just sit in there, go on my phone or whatever, and then I would go back inside to work. So on this day, I walked out and left the restaurant to head to my car in the parking lot. Almost immediately after leaving the building, I saw the same woman who had put up such a fuss. She was sitting at one of the outside tables. Instantly, our eyes locked for a moment before I couldn't help but look away from her. This was really awkward, and I decided to just ignore it and keep walking out to my car. As I passed her by, I cringed as I couldn't help but notice that she was getting up. She didn't say anything, but I could sense her start to walk behind me. I walked out to my car, reached it, unlocked it, and got inside. I refused to entertain the woman following me. When I was inside my car and in the driver's seat, I noticed that she had walked right up to my driver's window. She knocked on the window, and I heard her start speaking. I quickly hit lock before she surprisingly tried opening my driver's door. After it wouldn't open, she then knocked on my window. I heard her talking, and she still seemed really angry. I began rolling down my window, curious about what she wanted to say to me, but as soon as I rolled it down, she reached inside for me. I heard her say, "Hey," to me as I started rolling the window back up. The instant that she reached in, I felt in danger and decided to back out and just leave. The woman stood there, shouting at me as I drove my car out of the parking lot, and laughed. I knew that I couldn't go home because I had to return within 15 minutes, since that was how long my break was. I drove around a little and called my boss, letting her know of the situation that just happened. My boss told me that she was aware of a situation in the parking lot and told me that she was glad I was okay. I said I would be back within the 15 minutes, and I kept my word. When I returned to the McDonald's parking lot, though, it was quite the scene that I was not expecting. There were multiple police cars and flashing lights. I parked and went back inside to learn what had happened. A few police officers stood around, one talking with our manager. Apparently, after the woman had yelled at me in the parking lot, another employee went outside to try to calm her down. There was another shouting match, and a customer ended up calling the police. The woman got arrested for disorderly conduct and attempted assault after she apparently tried punching one of the other employees. All I have to say is that she must have had anger problems or something like that, because I couldn't believe what happened. I've seen some crazy customers in my days working at McDonald's, but none will ever top this woman. I don't really want to talk about the exact location, and I also don't want to mention my name or my friend's name for privacy reasons. I'd like to stay anonymous, and I hope it stays that way. What I will say is that this took place at a McDonald's in a bigger city. I was with my friend, who I'll call Jessica for this story. She was my best friend throughout high school. We were really close and always had each other's backs on everything, especially when it comes to stuff like this. We were having a girls' night out at a little dive bar in town. It was on a Monday night, and I remember there weren't many people there. We had both taken time off work and were planning on hanging out all week for a little getaway. Around 7:30, we left the bar, having been there for a few hours and probably had a few too many drinks. I realized when I stood up that it was probably not the best idea for me to drive, so Jessica offered to take me home. We agreed that we were hungry though, so we decided to get McDonald's. It was quick and easy, so we walked there instead of driving because it was just down the street and it would be fun to walk anyway. It wouldn't have been smart to drive such a short distance, when in reality it was already iffy whether we should have been driving in the first place. I'm big on not drinking and driving because I've lost 2 close family members to drunk drivers, so I've always sworn to myself that I would never partake in it, no matter what. I wasn't sure if Jessica was good to drive, but I trusted her because she knew how I felt about it. Anyways, we got to McDonald's, and we were worried the lobby was going to be closed, but we still took the risk of walking, and thankfully it wasn't. But when we got there, it was rather dark. The sun was finally setting, and what little light we had left was fading away by the second. There was a man sitting outside. He looked homeless or stressed out, or maybe both. He was sitting in the front outside by the glass window, not even on a seat. He was sort of just laying there on the ground. But he perked right up when he saw us, walked up to us, and asked if he could ask us a question. He asked for $20, and I told him I didn't have the money and needed it for McDonald's. He walked in, and we got our food, and I ate like half of it, only eating what my stomach could handle. Instead of throwing out my fries that I barely touched, I handed them off to the man outside. He seemed grateful, but he tried once more. "Hey, what about $15? Please, I'm really starving. I would truly appreciate it more than you know," he said. Jessica ended up buying the food for me, so I still had a $10 bill that I figured was better off with him. I gave it to him with a smile, and I started walking away. "Are you kidding me?" he said. I turned around in disbelief at what I just heard. He was mad because I only gave him $10 when he asked for 15. I explained to him that it was all I had and how he should be grateful. I demanded that he gave me my money back, which probably wasn't such a great idea and not really worth the hassle, but I was just so mad in the moment. "You want your stupid money, you dumb hoe? Come get it then." He put the money in his pants and told me to come get it. I practically gagged, and we started walking away. He then started following us and screaming at us. It was almost unintelligible, but I could make out some of what he was saying. He was calling me names and saying things I don't really care to repeat, like threatening to do harmful things. It got to the point where we had to start running, and I called the police and started crying. He was kind of old and frail and probably malnourished and dehydrated, so it wasn't too hard to get away from him. Some people are just so weird and crazy, I can't even begin to fathom or understand it. The police said they couldn't find him that night, and we didn't want to keep waiting around, so we let it go. They weren't going to put out a warrant for something like that, so all they could do was keep an eye on things. I just remember feeling so violated when he was talking to us like that. I genuinely believed I was going to have to fight for my life, but luckily it didn't come to that. I know Jessica and I could have probably beat him up together, 2 against 1, but you never know what someone's capable of. I mean, for the love of goodness, we didn't even do anything to set this man off, and he was that mad. He was so unpredictable that I thought maybe he was going to pull out a weapon and try to use it on us. You really never know anymore in this crazy world of ours. When I was around 10 years old, I lived in the city not far from a McDonald's. I remember one day I convinced my mom to let me go there alone to get some food. She was busy with something and gave me a few dollars, telling me to come back quickly. I was excited. It made me feel like a grown-up to go out on my own. I had done it several times before, not daily, but now and then. So I left and made my way to the McDonald's. It took me about 10 minutes to walk there. After leaving our house, I only had to walk to the end of the street, then cross a busy one. After that, I went down a bit before the McDonald's was on the right side. As I approached the restaurant, a sudden urge to use the bathroom hit me. I got inside, saw that the place wasn't very busy, and walked over to the bathrooms to use it before ordering. When I got inside the bathroom, nobody else was in there. I went into a stall, but about a minute later, I heard the bathroom door open and close. This was followed by footsteps that didn't go in far. They seemed to stop just inside the door. I thought this was weird. I kept expecting them to walk further in, but they didn't. After about a minute, I ducked down and looked underneath the bathroom stall I was in. I saw black shoes and the bottom of some black pants. They were standing right in front of the door. I wanted to leave, but I would have to walk past the person, so I decided to wait. As I sat in the bathroom stall, I couldn't believe how or why this person was standing there for so long. I decided to stay in the bathroom stall until they left. Actually, after probably 10 more minutes, I heard the door open, and the person walked out. I felt much better. The whole thing seemed really strange to me. Finally, I was able to leave the bathroom stall, and after I walked out of the bathroom, I looked around the restaurant. There still weren't many people in there. However, not long after leaving the restrooms, as I was making my way over to order, I saw a man sitting in the corner of the restaurant. I noticed his black shoes and pants. I realized this was likely the same guy. I hurried up and went to the counter to order, and I did not see the man as I did. After ordering, it didn't take long at all for me to get my food, and I then left the restaurant to walk home. I began making my way back along the sidewalk, but before making it more than 2 minutes, I had a bad feeling. I looked back, and sure enough, the same guy was trailing me. He was a little ways back and not right up on me, but it still made me really nervous. Could he be following me? Was he the same man who had just been standing inside the bathroom door for so long? I kept looking back every so often, and the man was always behind me. When I started walking faster intentionally, the guy did the same thing. I was now getting really worried. What if this guy followed me all the way back to my house? What if he ran up behind me and tried to grab me or something before I could get home? As I approached the busy street to wait at the crosswalk before crossing, I had to stop. The man would probably catch up to me before I could make it across the street. That's when I decided to just go for it. I started sprinting across the road with many cars still on it. I felt confident that I could make it and would not be hit by a car, but nevertheless, multiple cars honked at me as I ran. Luckily, I did make it across safely. I looked back and saw the man starting to run out into the street as well, but a car quickly approached and honked at him. He backed up and stayed on the other side. I used this opportunity to run up into my street and out of sight of the man. I ran the whole rest of the way home and made it back a short time later. After making it home, I told my mom all about the experience, and as a result, I was not allowed to go anywhere on my own for a while. But I didn't mind a bit. I was worried that the man would have somehow found out where we lived, and I worried about that for weeks. Luckily, I don't believe he did because I never saw him again after that. When I was 9 years old, I went to McDonald's one sunny afternoon with my mom and little sister. The place was very crowded with people everywhere. After going inside, I saw the toys in a case and stopped to check them out. But when I looked up a minute later, my mom and sister were gone. I thought they were still near me, but when I looked around, they weren't there. As I stood there looking around, a woman I didn't know came up to me. She somehow knew who I was. When she was right in front of me, she said my mom was looking for me, sounding a bit stern, like I was in trouble. I felt scared, thinking I might be in trouble because my mom had always told me to stay by her in public. The woman led me towards the exit, holding my hand, and told me it was dangerous to wander off like I had. As we were about to leave, I got a bad feeling. I hadn't questioned the situation until then, but I realized something was off. My mom hadn't even ordered yet, and we had planned to eat inside. So why would she have left? I suddenly pulled my arm away from the woman, ran through the crowd, and found my mom and sister at the far left front counter. I didn't see the woman again, and I didn't tell my mom about it, fearing I'd get in trouble. As I got older, I realized how close I came to possibly getting kidnapped. When I turned 16, I got my first job at the local McDonald's. One quiet Monday night, I found myself working behind the counter with just my coworker. The night had been uneventful until a man walked in. He looked like the grown-up version of the eerie kid from the movie Vivarium, towering at an imposing height of probably 6'6". He was wearing a suit with a black and white polka dot pattern, which seemed odd for a late-night visit to McDonald's. Unlike other customers, the man bypassed the counter and went straight to a corner table. He took out a fork, spoon, and a small plate from his pocket, placing them on the table as if prepared for a meal without any intention of ordering. I was weirded out, and the guy kept looking in my direction. Trying to ignore him, I went back to minding my own business behind the counter. When it was time to close up, I didn't want to tell the guy to leave. He seemed off, and I was nervous. I told my coworker, and when we came back out, the man was gone. We hadn't heard him leave, and we checked everywhere. I was relieved and went on with closing up. Later that night at my apartment, as I lay in bed, I glanced out my window and couldn't believe my eyes. The same tall, creepy man was walking down the sidewalk. He stopped and stared right at me. I quickly closed the blinds, my heart racing. After a few moments, I opened them slightly to see him walking away in the distance. I kept my blinds closed and went back to bed, still thinking about the creepy encounter. Maybe it was a coincidence, but it sent shivers down my spine, especially when he looked at me. I used to work at the drive-through window in a McDonald's near my house. I really disliked the job. Even though it was quite simple, the pay didn't match the duties. When I started, I earned $9 an hour. After 2 years, they promoted me to manager, bumping up my pay to $13 an hour. However, the added responsibilities made it not worth it for me, and that's partly why I eventually quit. But the incident I'm about to share was the final straw for me, leading me to bid farewell to that place. First off, I want to say that every job deserves respect, and I appreciate anyone working to make ends meet. I won't judge anyone for working at McDonald's, but it just wasn't worth my time and energy anymore, especially since I found a much better job that I genuinely enjoyed. Our McDonald's operated 24/7 back then, before the onset of COVID-19. Every night, there was this guy who would come through the drive-through around the same time. He consistently hit on me, asking for my number in the typical persistent way. No matter how many times I told him I wasn't interested, he persisted. I have to admit, his persistence was unmatched. For months, he would do this every single day. One night, during a particularly tough work week, I snapped when he asked me out again. I gave him a piece of my mind, telling him to leave or face trespassing charges for harassment. I handed him his food with a sly smile, thinking he'd finally get the message, but I underestimated his persistence. Within minutes, He was right in front of me, walking into the McDonald's, even heading into the kitchen area where I was standing. It was 11 o'clock at night, and there were only 2 other workers present. A nerdy guy who couldn't protect me and a 16-year-old girl who wasn't supposed to be there. The McDonald's closed at 8 p.m., and whoever left last was supposed to lock the door. Dylan, another manager, must have forgotten. Now I was in serious trouble. The guy threatened me, claiming he had a gun. He didn't pull it out, but he warned that if any of us called the police, he would use it. I tried to calm him down, but it took a long 15 minutes to convince him to leave without incident. Fortunately, nobody got hurt. After he finally left, I locked the door and couldn't resist yelling at him, making the situation worse. The McDonald's was connected to a gas station, and we all ran to hide in the back, calling the police. Luckily, a new hire working the late shift next door took charge. He helped us hide and sent the store into lockdown. We escaped through a secret door in the back, and I ran off in my car despite warnings not to. Thankfully, I got away, and everyone else stayed behind until the intruder fled. The guy's name was Gregory, but I don't recall his last name. He had a warrant out for his arrest and was eventually caught a few months later. I never set foot in that McDonald's again. The summer last year unfolded with a sense of freedom as I opted not to enroll in any classes, choosing instead to work at a gas station adjacent to my college campus. The decision was driven by a desire to escape the disillusionment with school and make some extra cash during my time off. The gas station was one of the first places I applied to, and to my surprise, they hired me on the spot. The catch? I was assigned to the night shift from 11 p.m. to 7 a.m. The initial novelty of the job wore off quickly as I realized the toll it took on my already erratic sleep schedule. Despite the odd hours, most of the shifts weren't that bad. The first few hours were typically busy, followed by a lull until around 5 a.m. This downtime allowed me to clean, restock the shelves, and relax until the morning rush. However, one Thursday night changed everything. I had a coworker until midnight, and after they left, I was left alone to manage the store. Time passed swiftly, and around 2 a.m., a man walked in, triggering an immediate sense of unease. He sported a shaved head and tattoos of strange symbols, and I could sense trouble brewing. The man, seemingly harboring prejudices, directed slurs at me, assuming I was Jewish. It was an unsettling encounter that set the stage for what was about to unfold. The clock read 1:58 a.m., and the man, after aimlessly wandering the store, approached the counter with a case of beer. However, my adherence to the county's alcohol purchase laws prevented me from selling it after 2 a.m. Politely explaining the situation, the man grew agitated, launching into a rant about the freedom of the country and the stupidity of the law. Attempts to reason with him proved futile, and I asked him to leave. Instead of complying, he changed his tone, urging me to bend the rules just for a few minutes. Fearing escalating tensions, I relented and sold him the beer. However, this was far from the end. The man, rather than leaving, sat in the bed of his truck, opened a beer, and lingered. Minutes later, another truck pulled up, and 2 more men joined the first, all sharing the same intimidating appearance, shaved heads and tattoos. They loitered, smoked, and drank openly, making me increasingly uneasy. Summoning the courage to confront them, I went outside to inform them that loitering was prohibited. Their smirks and challenging stares only fueled my anxiety. As I contemplated the potential threat they posed, an SUV pulled up, and 2 more men joined the group. It became evident that they were part of the same skinhead group, likely prolonging their night after a bar had closed. The situation intensified when the first man returned, even drunker than before, purchasing another case of beer. Feeling trapped, I accepted his money, and the skinheads cheered at their fresh supply. To my dismay, they had littered the area with empty cans, and I sensed I was stuck with them. Desperation led me to lock the store doors to prevent their re-entry. Alone in the office, I called the police, hoping for a resolution. Minutes later, a cruiser arrived, and the police officer confronted the group, urging them to leave. There was shouting I couldn't decipher, and for a brief moment, I feared things might escalate. Thankfully, the skinheads departed without causing a major scene. The police officer waited until they were gone before leaving himself. Out of caution, I approached him, asking him to stay a while as I cleaned up their mess. The next day, I reluctantly quit my job, haunted by the terror of being stuck behind that register if those men returned. The fear lingered, and the mere thought of encountering them in town filled me with dread. I couldn't fathom what those individuals were capable of, and my resignation was driven by a deep-seated concern for my safety. My town, it seemed, was plagued by such characters, always causing problems and instilling a perpetual sense of unease. The story took place 2 years ago. I was on my second week backpacking through Austria, and I reached a point where I was too exhausted to walk any longer. It was an unusually hot day. I had blisters all over my feet, and I was ready to call it quits. I was in the middle of nowhere and decided to thumb a lift to the nearest train station. But I was out of luck. I stood there for what felt like hours and no car would pick me up. I don't blame them. I spent 2 weeks sleeping in the woods, my clothes were dirty, and I probably looked like a maniac. When finally a truck pulled up, I didn't hesitate to hop inside, because I was so thankful to be able to sit down and rest my feet for a while. I asked the driver if he could drop me at the nearest station so that I could catch a train to Vienna, but he told me that he was heading back there anyway, and that he could take me there as long as I didn't mind him making a stopover to load the truck. I didn't, and so we drove along. We made some small talk, and he seemed to be very polite. It was a pretty enjoyable ride until we reached the first stop. He loaded his truck while I walked around a bit and bought some water at a gas station nearby. He had offered me drinks a few times along the ride, but I always declined because I don't feel comfortable with that. I got back into the truck, and we continued the drive to Vienna. Almost immediately after we took off again, he told me that it wouldn't be a problem for him if I wanted to take off some clothes since it was such a hot day. I told him that I was fine, but he brought it up a couple more times. He also asked me if I wanted to take a nap in the back, and that he had several hitchhikers sleeping there in the past. I declined again and started to feel a little uneasy around him, and planned to leave the truck at the next gas stop. All of a sudden, he nearly yelled at me to put my head down and hide because he was driving past his stepfather's car, and he didn't want him to see me in the truck. That struck me as odd, but I did anyway because his yelling took me by surprise. That confirmed my resolution to get out of there as soon as possible, and I asked him to drop me off at the next stop, and made up an excuse that it was my goal to enter Vienna by foot, and that I was rested enough to make it, thanks to his lift. He agreed, and I got my stuff ready. He suddenly turned to me and said that I looked familiar, and that he was sure he saw me somewhere before. I shrugged it off, but he insisted he remembered my face. He asked me if I ever went to a swingers club, because he was sure he saw me there sometime. That caught me off guard, and I told him that this was impossible because I'd never been to one. Well, do you want to? I'm going to one in Vienna. Let's go there together. I'm sure you'll like it. At this point, I really wanted to get off the truck ASAP, and told him that I had no intention to come with him, and asked him to drop me off now. He didn't answer, but reached into his pants and started masturbating while he drove along. I froze up, clutching my backpack on my lap, and didn't know what to do. I kept thinking that I'd jump off as soon as he stopped somewhere, and tried to ignore what he was doing there since he didn't respond to my plea to let me out. A gas station was coming up, and he stopped what he was doing and asked if we should take a shower together. I figured that there'd be people around, and that it would make it easier to get rid of him, so I told him sure. Why not? He pulled up, and as soon as he stopped, I yanked open the door and run across the parking area of the gas station, hoping that he wouldn't come after me. He didn't, so I just kept running until the station was out of sight and I reached a busy street. Only after my heart stopped racing and I caught my breath, I realized that I left my shoes at the truck. I walked the last few kilometers barefoot and kept a lookout for the truck until I reached Vienna. So this was told to me by an old family friend, Nikki, numerous times as a kid growing up, as one of those life advice stories to keep in mind through the years. And to her credit, I have never forgotten it. Whenever anything associated with hitchhiking comes up, it always springs to mind and probably always will. Makes me a bit ill whenever I think about it, actually. So Nikki, who grew up at the same time as my dad around the early 80s, was a young woman in her mid-20s. She's one of those real kind-hearted souls, always willing to help another out in a time of need, you know? And I can't imagine her being anything other than that when she was younger, so I totally see her doing this too. So, driving into the city, she saw a man walking down the side of the road. As she neared, he turned and, in typical hitchhiker manner, stuck out the old arm and thumb. Nikki, bless her heart, pulled over and asked him if he needed any help. She told me that he was really polite, if not a bit shy, when he asked for a lift into the city. Nikki gave a smile and popped open the passenger door for the guy, who tossed his bag into the back seat and buckled up for the ride ahead. They talked pleasantly for most of the trip, about friends, the news, etc. She felt they were getting on really well, and even bought him dinner at the pit stop a little over halfway there. She says he seemed really flustered and awkward when she paid. But one of the things they had talked about was money, and how he was pretty dang strapped for cash, which was why he was hitchhiking in the first place. But he eventually relented, and they went on their way. As soon as they got into the city, he thanked her profusely for the ride and the food, and asked to be dropped off once they hit downtown. Before getting out, he asked for Nikki's phone number so he could contact her someday and catch up. Thrilled at the prospect of knowing how her new friend was faring, Nikki wrote it down for him and drove off with the warm feeling of a good deed done. Now, I'm sorry if you were expecting something creepy to have happened by now, but I think this is what freaked me out so much as a kid. How nice everything seemed to have worked out. Nikki would get this crease in her forehead and a funny look in her eye when she would tell me the next part. A week later, she got a phone call from her driving buddy. He didn't let her get a word in edgewise after hello and told her that she should thank God that she was raised so nice, because when he first got in her car, he was planning on raping and murdering her once they got to that pit stop. That he was going to steal that car and dump her body in a ditch further down the road and go on his merry way. But after she talked with him so kindly and treated him to dinner with a smile on her face, he couldn't bring himself to do it. He didn't think that he could live with himself after doing that to such a nice lady. And to please, Nikki, please, never, ever pick up another hitchhiker. Then he hung up the phone. Nikki never got a call from him again. When she tried redialing the number, she got a payphone. And so, Mr. Hitchhiker, I know I'm never going to meet you, because I'm going to listen to the advice you gave your driving buddy and never, ever pick up a hitchhiker